Here we are in chapter 6. Chapter 6 has 3 parts. This is part 1, and it's around what is assault and one of the preventative approaches we're going to look at, which is called noticing the switch. Now, this is an approach based off of Christine Senn. She has a program called EAAA, or Flip the Switch, I believe it's called in layman terms, and I'll cite her on the little video thing, but it's based on some research she's done around sexual assault, and we'll get into that as we get going. So as usual, you can check out that you have your proper handouts. This one is the one that says Noticing the Switch, and there's going to be a little exercise we'll do at the end, so 2 little parts to it. So you can have that out and ready as well, your questions and terms log as always. So what we want to first talk about is the beginning ideas of what is assault. We're going to look at this a little bit further in part 2 as well. But up front here, assault is essentially any sexual activity that happens without your consent. So when that full consent and hot spice model isn't present, this is known as sexual assault. We want to differentiate this between sexual assault and something that sometimes we'll get confused a little bit as we're thinking about it, which is something that is kind of called bad sex. So bad sex might be, if you didn't have a great time, like you didn't feel it pleasurable, if a partner or both partners didn't reach orgasm, if that's what you were going for. There's sort of, if you had sort of funny feelings afterwards, like you're trying to figure out your own sexual kind of journey. Those are not the same as sexual assault, which is the absence of yes. Okay, so make sure we're differentiating between feelings, normal human feelings of unsureness and figuring things out and how we feel after. That is different from something that happened where we didn't say yes, both verbally and with body language and all those other steps we've talked about. As a side note, if you have one of those bad sex experiences, that's a beautiful opportunity to think about, again, communication and with your partner, and advocating for your own pleasure. Remember, we talked about in that sexual Bill of Rights kind of idea was you have the right to a pleasurable experience, or at least advocate for one. So whatever your gender is, remember that you are allowed to have a good time, and you can work hopefully with your partner to figure out how to make that happen. So coming back to sexual assault can be done essentially on purpose. Someone can knowingly do this really bad thing to us. It can also happen without intention. So someone who isn't aware, recognizing that someone saying that they weren't aware of what the rules of consent were doesn't excuse it, doesn't make it okay. But we have to understand that it can happen both ways, because sometimes people we're being intimate with might not be as educated as we are about consent. Doesn't mean it's okay that they're not educated about those things. It'd be like saying, oh, I wasn't aware I was allowed to murder people, wasn't allowed to murder people, right? You can't claim a negligence is still your responsibility to know these things. But we have to know that everyone's not as informed as we are at this point in the course. So what we also want to know then is around sexual assault is it's not always sometimes what we imagine it might be. Again, what was portrayed in movies or TV shows. If you've seen scenes like that, often difficult to watch scenes, they're often loud, violent, so often there's screaming and struggling and things like that. When we look at the research of sexual assault, it's actually often happens more like kind of akin to a metaphor uses around drowning. So again, in the movies, drowning, splashing, and someone, help, help, help. But in real life, actually, if you're trained as a lifeguard, you're actually looking for the silent sinking underwater. Most people don't actually splash around much when they're drowning. So often sexual assault can happen in a similar way, where we find ourselves in a bad situation and it sort of went across this line and it wasn't an obvious moment, which we're going to look at that moment in a second, on how we got from something that felt safe to something that's completely not okay now. One of the other added kind of complexities of this is the fact that sexual assault 80% of the time, or potentially more, the statistics kind of range a little bit, are actually with people that we know. So someone that we've met before, a partner, a friend, a acquaintance, someone we've partied with before. It's very rarely a complete stranger attack in a dark alleyway kind of situation. Obviously, those are very scary and very bad. We want to be prepared, hopefully with some safety preventative stuff on those things too. But we're specifically going to look at sort of this broader moment of the more common situation, which is with people that we know. So this is where we get into this idea of what's called the switch. The switch is the moment that a safe interaction turns unsafe. We have a safe person and things are going okay, someone that we know, and then suddenly things have gone into this zone that aren't okay. Noticing this moment is really important because we then have to change our own mindset of how we are being with this person in return. So a lot of times we're socialized. We talked about a bit in the beginning chapters around this idea of being polite and sort of going with the flow, some of those social pressures. And that can sometimes feel like it extends to our sexual interactions, but that's not the case, especially after this switch moment happens. So if we're normally chatting with a friend and they make a joke and then something happens and then they make a sexual suggestion and we're like, oh, no, I don't think I would like to do that. That same joking vibe's still there, but they keep going. We've now made the switch. So some of the things to watch out for is that a person should only ask once. As soon as they've asked twice, we're now already beginning that danger zone of, well, why didn't you listen to my answer the first time? That was my answer. Now I'm going to change how firmly I'm responding back to you, because even if we were laughing and joking a second ago, that's not funny anymore. That's not okay anymore. Okay, so keeping asking. If anyone ever starts pressuring, right? Again, you're laughing, joking with a friend or, someone you're meeting and hanging out with at a party. And then, like, hey, come on, like, it'll be fun. Come on. Hey. And you get this sort of repetitive coming at you. Now we're also in that switch zone. Another person shows anger. You say, oh, I'm not interested. And they circle it. Oh, you're one of those girls, aren't you? Or, oh, you're that kind of guy or that person, right? And you get this sort of escalated anger response coming back at you. That's another moment to notice. We've switched, recognizing that is no longer safe. Pleading, the same thing, right? Like, oh, like, I really hoped, that this might be a thing. Like, as soon as you get that, like, they're still kind of asking, but they've gone into this like emotional vulnerability kind of coming at your soft spot, hoping that you'll meet them because you really wanted it or whatever. We've now gone into a not safe zone, right? So not safe isn't always this aggressive, coming at you physically not safe. Not safe is around not listening. And there's lots of different ways that looks like, right? Anytime someone tries to change your mind, shows anger, keeps asking, adds pressure, or pleads with you, we've made the switch. So the 3 steps around the switch are recognizing when a situation has become potentially dangerous. That's the moment you then get to change your behavior. You no longer have to, stay in that zone of laughy, jokey, whatever. You have full permission to come in, as we've talked about, with your boundaries and being assertive. We've talked about different ways to say it quite firmly. You can repeat yourself as many times as you want. You don't have to have any excuse. You can just say no. You can say the same thing over and over loudly, whatever you feel safe to do so, recognizing and remembering your house responses. If you find yourself shutting down, just be aware. That's okay. This is a normal human reaction, but notice it happening and notice and remind yourself those mantras and tell yourself, okay, I know why this is happening. I know what this is about. I'm allowed to take space, try and get my bearings, breathe until I can find my center again, feel safer, call a friend, all of those types of things. Okay, so the first thing you're going to say is there's the switch. As soon as you notice one of those behaviors, and the next thing you're going to follow up with one of your mantras, You don't have to be nice. This is your body, your right. You can speak up, get space, whatever you need to tell yourself, that inner voice to remind yourself this is a moment where safety first, you first. The other person's emotions or needs are no longer something you need to be looking at or thinking about. You get to go completely about what do you need in that moment and how to try and best get that for yourself. All right. So this is sort of the idea of the switch. The biggest thing here, again, is around practice. So when we haven't really thought these things through before they happen to us, when we find ourselves in that moment, all of our brain patterns and circuitry and stuff hasn't been built yet. So it's like we're trying to build a bridge at the same time as walking across it, which is really much more complex. So we want to try and build our bridge first, so that way if we ever have to walk across it, it's kind of already there. So for this reason, I've given you this little handout here, which is an opportunity to write yourself a script. So you get to use your creative side for a second. And I want you to imagine a scenario where you are with someone you quite care about, a friend, someone else, even a partner, and write down a imagined scenario of things going well, laughing, joking, hanging out, flirting, whatever, and then a moment where the switch happens. I want you to underline and or circle and or star that moment and what it looks like in your script. And then I want you to write down how and what you would do in response in communicating your boundaries, getting more firm, what mantras you might use, pulling together what we've learned so far in the book, and how you might then create space and or ask for help, right? So those 3 stages, notice the pattern, be firm in your boundaries, create space, ask for help, that you can then do those things. Then the important thing is practicing this script. So that's on the second page of your handout. If you don't have a safe person you can do this in a role play with, do it with yourself in a mirror. Make a video of yourself. Practice it a few times. You might feel a little weird doing it, but that's totally good. The weirder you feel, that usually means the more you need to practice it, because this should feel like you could just like bust it out. You've already built your bridge. You're comfortable with this bridge. You've crossed it many times in your head, so that if you have to do that in a moment, you're there. Okay, there's a couple of sort of reminders here on things to do as you practice that. So make sure you're kind of noting each of those. And then at the end, I just want you to try a little journal reflection kind of moment of think about what reactions you had as you did it the first time. What parts made you feel nervous? Was there anything you felt weird about? Was there anything that you felt guilt or shame or any other emotions come up when you did or said or imagined? And just sort of addressing those, noticing them. Everything is normal and human that you're going to experience, but really giving yourself that opportunity to notice your human side and support yourself, that positive inner voice. If you want more on the positive inner voice, check out my first book, How to Like Yourself, to really get acquainted with that inner voice that we use and we talk to ourselves every day with. While we're at it, the second book that I have, the Resilience Workbook for Teens, that has a lot of these sort of strengthening, resilient exercises that can actually help add to this experience as well. So a couple extra options for you. Right, so that is one of the preventative exercises. From here, we're going to talk a little bit more in part 2, the next video, on a little bit more what it might feel like if we ever go through this or if a friend does, and then ways to get help. And then part 3, we're going to look at something called bystander intervention, which is a fancy way of saying watching out for other people and helping out, keeping everyone safe when the need might arise. Okay, so I will see you in part 2.